Welcome everyone to the webinar. We'll now begin the program. Just a few logistics before Ruth starts the discussion. Participants are invited to submit questions by typing them into the questions feature on the GoToWebinar control panel. Throughout the session, the speakers will also invite you to participate in live polls using GoToWebinar's polling feature.
Great, thank you. I'm Ruth Goodwin-Groen, the Managing Director of the Better Than Cash Alliance, and I'd like to welcome each of you to our webinar today. Good morning to all those who are on the West Coast. It's very bright and early, West Coast of the US that is, bright and early. Glad that you joined us. To those who are in Africa and Europe, good afternoon, welcome. And to those for whom it's in the evening in Asia and the Pacific, we're really glad that you've joined us and hope that we'll keep you lively enough to stay awake during our webinar today. So welcome to all of you. I'd also like to welcome Dr. David Porteous, who is the author of this toolkit. He is the CEO of Bankable Frontier Associates, a Boston-based consultancy that has worked with BTCA on our development results-focused research program that has resulted in some fascinating cases. I'm sure you've seen them on our website, and these toolkits. David is the lead author of this corporate toolkit, which drew on incredible depth of experience from the evidence that he's collected in working with businesses around the world, as well as our corporate members. So, David, you have more years of experience in this than we probably want to talk about, but we're really glad that you're with us today. Welcome.
Ruth, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone who's online this morning. And of course, I should say that although I'm designated as the lead author, like all the toolkits, it's taken a team, my colleagues here at BFA, your colleagues there at Better Than Cash, Ruth, and especially some of your members who have a lot of experience in this area, and it's been really quite a fascinating process to try and collect some of that evidence and to realize that for businesses in developing countries, there's not yet a lot out there that's publicly available, and yet there seems to be this strong market opportunity for businesses to make a shift. So we're really hoping this toolkit helps your members and others to make that shift and to frame the case to do it.
Yes, thanks, David. It really has been a team effort. And so for those of you who've been part of the toolkit development who are with us today, thank you for your contribution. And we look forward to an ongoing relationship in improving this toolkit because it's going to be a living document. So for those of you who don't know, the Better Than Cash Alliance is a UN-housed global alliance of governments, private sector, and the development community who are all committed to moving away from cash to some form of electronic digital payments and transfers. We do three things. We advocate for the transition away from cash to whatever is appropriate in each market in terms of electronic or digital payments. We develop cutting-edge toolkits and knowledge and research products, such as the case studies that we mentioned before, and of course these toolkits, and we provide technical support as appropriate. So the toolkit we're going to be launching today is the corporate toolkit, and that's one of three for different stakeholders. For the development community, we had the webinar on Monday. For governments, we had the webinar yesterday. And then there are also two other more general toolkits, one an ecosystem diagnostic that we'll be having the webinar for tomorrow, and then on measurement on Friday. So these toolkits were developed in response to demand from members because people were saying to us, okay, so where do we start? What do we do? How do we think about it? What are the right questions? So that's why we developed these toolkits in partnership with our members to be able to respond to that demand. So as Maura said, our administrator today, we welcome you to submit your questions throughout the session in the question box. You can see it on the screen at the right. That if questions come up and you think, wait a minute, they haven't covered this or this doesn't make sense, please type it in so that we can address it as we go and also improve it in the toolkit. Just so you know, if you get called away, we are recording this webinar, so you'll be able to come back and listen to it later at your convenience. And also, often people put the question in, so when can I actually get the toolkit? At the end of the session today, we'll be sending you a link to a site which is a closed site, but it's for all the people who are members and want to look at this toolkit and to be able to contribute to the beta version in the next month. So let's look at the agenda that we have for today. So we're going to go through where businesses are at in their digital journey and why they are shifting away from cash. We're looking at how to prioritize payment streams and how to frame the case for change. And David has a great case study for us. So for those of you who went to business school, you'll feel completely at home in the case study. And there'll be plenty of time at the end, 15 minutes, maybe more, for your questions. So please, as I said, don't hesitate to put them in. And then we'll explain how the link to the toolkit works more completely at the end. So you will be seeing actual screenshots from the toolkit today. So I just want to let you be aware of that. It's not a usual PowerPoint presentation. You won't be seeing more bullets like this. You'll be seeing actual screenshots so that you can see what it's going to be looking like, and David can walk you through that. So be prepared for that. And also, as the toolkit will not be a big paper manual that we're going to print, it's going to be web-enabled and going to be interactive. It'll give you a better sense of what you're going to be getting. So David, just by way of introductions, are businesses paying majority in cash or electronic at the moment today? What's your experience?
Well, Ruth, you won't be surprised to hear that it varies, and there seem to be at least 3 dimensions to how it varies. The first and the obvious one is by country. So countries that have more electronic options available, businesses tend to pay more electronically. So Northern Europe, for example, seems to have made a lot of progress in that respect. Second dimension is it varies by the type of payments. So we typically find that payments of salaries a bit further ahead in terms of the electronic payment journey than, say, suppliers that we'll talk more about today. And then, of course, it varies by size of business. So larger businesses, especially international ones, definitely have got further down the route because there seem to be fixed costs of change involved that make it just that bit harder as businesses get smaller. So it's across the landscape, but we still see a lot of checks out there in businesses today, and therefore a lot of potential to make that shift.
Great. Well, it would be really interesting for us and also for everyone else who's on the webinar to know what size of businesses and what type of businesses are on the webinar today. So we're going to be doing polls, as you said, so let's go to the first poll, and you can see on your screen the different options. And so please click on the bullet that most reflects your organizational business that you work for. Do you come from the large businesses that David was talking about, or are you a smaller one? If you want to put it in that we had to pick 5 options, and we definitely have a lot of consultants on the webinar today, we know from the registration, and we're thrilled if you're a consultant working with us because you're going to be the key people to take the toolkit, and then of course many of our friends as funders or investors. But if you're in the other category, please put that into the question section so that we know whether you're an international NGO that works with business or an academic or some other, or you're a business of a different size. So please put that in. So we'll give you about 5 more seconds to finish that poll, and then we'll see where everybody's coming from today. So let's close the poll and see where we're at then. Oh, terrific. We've got a lot of consultants, as I'd hoped, great, as well as, of course, lots of different size businesses. And it's great that we have smaller as well as larger businesses on the line today. David, what's your reaction to those, to that cross-section that we've got on the webinar today?
Well, Ruth, in some ways surprising that there is many small businesses because clearly they're the biggest by number out there and yet often the hardest to reach. So good to see that in addition to the good number of large businesses, which is perhaps more expected.
Terrific. So special welcome to those in the small business category today. So also everybody's at a different stage of their journey to digital payments. So we're going to do another poll here to see how, since we seem to be on a roll here, we'll see where everyone's at a different stage. So your company or organization, would you categorize it as just starting out on the digital journey, that you're underway, that you're well underway, or you're all digital? If you don't know, that's also completely okay. So we're glad that you joined us for the webinar. So again, we're not checking, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just to give us all a sense of who's on the webinar today and to help David in terms of his how he moderates his comments today. So let's close the poll then and see where we're at. Oh, the 20% of you who are all digital, hooray, congratulations. And then David, we've got quite a good cross-section there of people starting out underway and well underway.
We do, Ruth, and it's actually quite exciting to see the all-digital proportion as well, because these toolkits clearly are directed primarily at businesses starting out or underway in the journey, because those further on don't need as much help. But I guess part of Better Than Cash's hope is that the lessons from those who are well underway, or indeed all digital, that those can be shared over time, and those can encourage and inform the businesses at an earlier stage of the journey.
Yes, excellent. And maybe some of the all digital are the consultants who then will be able to help with this toolkit for others. So which level of reader will make the best, or level of user of the toolkit would make will the toolkit help most, I guess, is the question.
Well, perhaps we can look at the decision tree that we have of the toolkit, because that gives a sense that it's been designed to accommodate a range of different starting levels. So although, as I say, it's directed particularly at the starting out level and those who have something underway, the decision tree there, which comes as a screenshot from the toolkit, indicates that you can start at different points depending on where you are in the journey. So for example, on your screen there, the first section asks, are you new to digital payments? If you are, you may find the first section most useful because it frames the context and the background, really. And it could take half an hour to do that, but if you already know those things, don't bother. Rather jump right into the second section, where the question is, how ready are you to start putting some time and effort into thinking about shifting your payments? And if your answer is, I really don't know yet, that's where the second section is primarily for you, which goes through a process of thinking about prioritizing. Now, maybe you've already done that, in which case you are underway, and you're ready to talk about framing the case for a particular type of payments. That's where the third section of the toolkit, you can see there, allows you today to access two different modules, one for employees, salary and wage payments, the other for suppliers, which we'll talk more about today. But even if you in fact have come that far and you've addressed those, you may still find the fourth section, which is more like an archive. It has resources such as frequently asked questions, links, things which people who, even though they've been through this journey, may still find helpful, and we hope that that will build further over time.
I really like the fact that you've got that time there, David, so that people, you know, all of us are strapped for time. We can see how long it's going to take us to get through and through the different sections of it. So we're going to end up with a recommendation at the end of stage 3, a recommendation for each one of those different payment streams to the CFO. Is that right? That's what we end up with?
That's absolutely right, Ruth. And this whole journey is designed to try and make the best use of the scarcest resource inside most corporations today, and that's time of the key people. So getting them as quickly as possible to where they're able to frame the case and decide whether, and if so, how to proceed. That's really what it's all about in this toolkit.
So they'll end up doing their own implementation plan once they've got that the options very clearly in front of them. So why then, in your experience, do people start on this journey?
Well, as you can imagine, there really are a diverse range of answers from businesses that we've spoken with around the world. The picture that you see on your screen, again, is a screenshot from the toolkit, which shows the 5 typical reason categories that Better Than Cash talks about. And you can find businesses across all of these, but the 2 most prevalent ones seem to be cost saving. So we've seen, for example, in this forthcoming case about Filipino businesses, medium to large size businesses, that with their suppliers there really is a case to make for reducing costs somewhere between 25 and 46%. So cost saving really is important to most businesses. And then I would highlight the 3rd bucket on the screen there, speed and security. So again, digitizing key processes has a lot to do with reducing time, a lot to do with managing cash flow, and that matters a lot to businesses. It's worth saying, though, that even some of the other reasons, inclusion, development, those are starting to come onto the landscape we find for businesses. For example, in Nigeria, where the government policy called Cashless Nigeria has actively incentivized and, in fact, in some cases penalized businesses for using cash. The reasons for that policy are promoting inclusion and development. And we've seen businesses, especially large businesses in Nigeria, really get onto the program. And that's the subject of another of the forthcoming Better Than Cash case studies.
Yes, they're due out next month, so watch for those 2. It's fascinating, those numbers that you've got there from the larger businesses in the Philippines. So those that 25 to 46% number really makes will focus people's attention on the opportunities for cost savings, and that's not out of the air. That's from the actual businesses you worked with in the Philippines, right, David?
Indeed, yes. That comes from a process last year of talking with a range of them and even surveying smaller ones too.
Great. So you have put test your knowledge quizzes into this toolkit. So everybody loves a quiz as they go. And so this is one of the questions that you put in there. And so we'll see how if everybody's awake at this time, wherever you are. So is there, or there is, an international standard for business invoicing? Is that true? Is it false? Or do you not know? This is a fascinating question. Do you know if there's an international standard for business invoicing? If you can click on the poll one, we'll give you 5 more seconds. We're not going to check, of course. If you don't know, it's completely fine. But it's fascinating to see. And I have to confess, I didn't know the answer to this when I first saw the toolkit. So we'll see how everyone goes. Right, let's close the poll. And we've got about half false, half I don't know, and then 10% true. So David, can you reveal the answer?
Indeed, Ruth. Well, the trues get the prize, and it's a little bit of a leading question, frankly, because the answer is there actually is, but it's not that well known, and it's somewhat appropriate, Ruth, this morning, given that, in fact, that Better Than Cash is hosted at a UN agency, that it's a sister UN agency, the United Nations Center for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Business, UNCFAT, which actually was set up with a mandate to do this type of thing, to improve worldwide communication in the areas of electronic data interchange. So they do have this UNCFAT standard. There is a lot of work going on to make that actionable, but in many ways it's very good news, because one of the problems for a lot of businesses today is that invoices are sent in thousands of different formats, very difficult to read into electronic processes for straight-through processing. So initiatives like this, as they're driven through, means that it should get easier in future in areas like invoicing.
Fascinating. And in the toolkit there'll be a link to that UN CFAT standard for business invoicing. So for those of you who didn't know or thought that there wasn't one, you've learned something new already this morning. So David, so what you do in this in the toolkit is really help businesses figure out where to start. So where do they start? How do they prioritize? What's the most important place?
Well, Ruth, that really we find is the key question, because it is really the exceptional business which can convert all of its different payment streams at the same time. So facing this choice about where to start is an important one, and it really is the subject of the second section of the toolkit, the readiness and engagement section, as you can see on the ribbon at the top of your screens there. And all this screenshot shows is an example of a very simple tool that's available for download, which enables you to think through some of the decision criteria in coming to say, well, where should I start? So that little box you can see there comes off a spreadsheet, and it lists down the vertical columns the different types of payment stream at a high level: employees, suppliers, government. Of course, you could break that down further into subcategories. And then across the horizontal side of the box, it really has three dimensions. The first is, how important is it to your business objectives? And that's given a weighting in this example of 40%. That's the most important thing, that it really achieves business objectives. The second is, how available are electronic payment options out there, given that in most countries, businesses will be takers of what can be offered. They're seldom large enough, non-financial businesses, that is, to drive new options alone. And then the third is a very important one. We'll talk more about this, but how easy is it to shift this category of payees? And so in the example there, you can see a simple weighting. There's a simple scoring system that says we'll give a 4 to the category that scores highest in each of the columns. So to just illustrate that, you can see under the ease of shifting, that's number 3 column, under employees, they're considered the easiest to shift, certainly compared with governments and even with suppliers. And that's often the case. That's why payments to salaries and wages have often shifted the furthest. But the outcome of this combined prioritization exercise, in fact, suggests that suppliers get the highest weighted score here, considered across all 3 of those dimensions. And so if this were your business, you'd be saying, there's a case for me to dig into suppliers and see what I can do about shifting them to receive electronic payments.
Fascinating, and I noticed that this is Business Toolkit download number 3, so maybe out of the toolkit this is the spanner or something like that to help us figure it out. But clearly the suppliers win on this weighting. They've got 3.2, so let's focus on suppliers. That's what we're going to do next, isn't it? And let's work through that case study that you've got on the suppliers. It'll be great.
Great. Well, let's start then, going to the next slide.
And we've handed over the controls to you, David, so that you're now on a roll with your case study. Do take us through.
Perfect. Let me do that. So this first slide is probably familiar if you've already dialed into the previous stakeholder toolkit discussions. What it shows is simply this disciplined 5-step process which leads up to making a recommendation about whether to shift a particular payment stream, and if so, how. And so the process there's no rocket science in it. It's just a structured way of saying, if you really want to get serious about this, think through what your drivers are. That's step 1. Think through who the stakeholders are, because your degree of influence over them changes, and this is a change management process after all. Think through the options. That takes a bit of time sometimes in order to assess the costs. That's the 4th bucket there, and then go on to look at the risks after that. So what I'd like to do, Ruth, is then step through this case study. As you said, exciting for those perhaps who've been in business school. Fortunately, with webinars, there's no cold call possible, no virtual cold call in this case, but at least the opportunity to think through an example applied through the lens of this particular small business. The example we give in the toolkit is a medium to large size business we call FICorp. Now, it's a synthetic business, by which I mean it doesn't actually exist, but it's a composite of a range of things that we've seen in some of these countries where we've been looking at cases, the Philippines, Nigeria, for example. And so we hope that a range of businesses will see some aspects of themselves in FICorp. FICorp exists in a context. It's this famous, now famous Republic of Ecosystemia, well known and beloved to better than cash, a country that has a payment environment where certain options, in particular electronic fund transfers for bulk transfers are available. And that's good news when we start thinking about suppliers. Now, it's important to say with suppliers that the payments of invoices from suppliers is really the last step in quite a complex process that starts with procurement. It goes on to delivery and confirmation of delivery, to then receiving an invoice, taking that through an authorization process for payment, and only then paying out. And so what we're discussing is quite a complex process where the benefits of digitization often come towards the end of that process. So let's step through framing the case for this synthetic business, FiCorp, where the CFO has said to his team, please tell me, can we shift our suppliers to electronic payments? So the next step,
there we go.
The next step there starts, as you saw in the 5-step process, with saying, so what do we want to achieve as a business? What are our drivers? So the finance manager there has gone through weighting. You can see that in the boxes here, the priority of these different drivers. And if you look across them, it looks fairly conventional for a business of this size. Reducing costs is the top priority. Managing cash flow matters as well. There is a bit about dealing with losses, partly linked to cash payment, partly linked to, talks about double billing by certain suppliers. They really do need to think about suppliers. Their business depends on them. And then there even is this little element of corporate social responsibility, because they do work with small farmers around the country of ecosystemia. So that's what they're seeking to achieve as their drivers. So the finance manager then...
David, this is what type of business is FiCorp?
FiCorp is a dairy company in this example. We use that simply because that makes it a nationwide business as a large dairy company dealing with a range of different suppliers, which we're going to see shortly, which affect some of the choices about how they can pay those suppliers. So let's go on to talk about what those stakeholders might be, which is the second step of the process. So clearly for the finance manager, the whole thing is about persuading the CFO, because the CFO ultimately will have to make the case into the executive of the company. But the real point of this is to say that as a change management process, the finance department alone can't make all the changes. There's a need for other departments that you can see here in the company also to make those changes. This stakeholder listing also includes suppliers who are in many ways clients of this process. And there's no business that can afford to upset key suppliers. And so framing them as clients helps to make sure that their needs and interests are taken into account.
David, since you've got the controls, you'll need to mute everybody else because there's some background noise there, or you'll need to hand it back to us.
Okay, let me see if I can do that on my screen. Trying to do that now, but I'm not sure that I can, so I'm happy to hand it back to you, Ruth, if that gets rid of them.
Yeah, because I think it's difficult, so we'll take it back and we'll mute everyone apart from you and me. So
great.
That seems to solve the problem. We'll be working with you. So, David, you were just in the middle of saying that the CFO was the most important stakeholder here. We love him or her. He has to make the choice, and she or she has to make the call about whether to shift payments to suppliers in the FiCorp case. So, correct?
Indeed, and in fact, let me tell you, CFOs face a lot of noise, like we just did on the line right then, in terms of coming to that decision, and that's why thinking through who the parties are involved is a pretty key step in the process. But let's go on to the next step, which takes us just another step deeper to your question about what is FiCorp's business. So this is where the finance manager starts to drill in a bit and to say, what are the types of suppliers we've got out there? Because they won't all be as easy to shift. And so on your screens there, you can see in this profile a whole lot of contracts which are managed from head office across factory, equipment suppliers, transportation, and so on. And then this very important category for FiCorp, the collection center contracts, where the milk comes in. And you can see there are a few large farms, 5, but if you look across to the payments made to them each year, by far the largest number there. and then a whole lot of small farms, 45, the biggest category of the supplier base, lots of payments being made to them, in fact more than 80% of payments, and yet they're barely more than 20% of the value of payments.
So that sounds like our 80-20 conundrum. So what should we do, large farms or small farms?
Well, you know, Ruth, like most 80-20 conundrums, you really have to go back to what the drivers are. Because if the driver were, for example, cash flow management, then obviously you'd look at the 80% of value, because that's going to have the biggest effects on your cash flow, the timing of payment there. If your issue were cost reduction, then you'd actually want to look at the number, because the cost per invoice processed is typically pretty constant regardless of the amount involved. So in FICORP's case, we've already seen that both of those factors matter. So at this stage, there's a need to go a little bit further, in fact, to drill one level deeper in FICORP and to say, how are those suppliers currently being paid? So what you see on the screen there is, in fact, a breakdown that says, across those categories of suppliers, the same ones that you've seen, how are they being paid at the moment? So you can see for small farmers, it's all in cash, and a fairly substantial amount of cash today that's going out to those small farmers. Most of the suppliers are paid in checks, and as I said at the beginning of this webinar, that in fact is common for businesses like this in the developing world, and in fact in parts of the developed world as well today. But there are a few, just 1% of payments, but 17% of value that are already receiving some type of electronic bank transfer. So
wait a minute, hold on, David. The 1% and the 17%, where is that number? Ah, the bottom of the screen there, 1 and 17%. Okay.
That's quite right. So 1% of payments, 17% of value, electronic today. That's where FICORP starts its digital journey.
Great. So that's where they're going to start. So what's the next step?
Well, the next step is thinking a bit harder in terms of these categories of suppliers, which will mean, in fact, in some cases, actually going to speak to them and to find out, do they have bank accounts? So in the case of FICORP, we know that most of the small farmers don't yet have bank accounts, but the large farmers do. In particular, what this screenshot shows here brings together, Ruth, what you were just talking about. So here we show the payment volume, which is this, back to your 80-20, is it low, medium, or high? Clearly for small farmers, it's high today. Then the value, low, medium, or high, where the farmers are the biggest input suppliers, and those two categories of payments together constitute the highest value. But then this question of, as FICORP, as a medium, large-sized business, how much influence do you really have over the suppliers? Now that's really a function of how big you are as a business, but also a function of where those suppliers are at and your ability to offer incentives to get them to change. And so the assessment done by the FICORP management team here is that the degree of influence is quite high over farmers because FICORP is their largest customer, therefore has the ability to at least nudge them, even push a little, but of course you can't push too hard because they're critical to your business. So it's that prioritization process, Ruth, that gets you below thinking just about suppliers to thinking about categories of suppliers to work with.
David, this is the second screen that we've seen that has prioritization on it. Can you just briefly comment on the two different prioritizations that you've got going on there?
Absolutely. So the real aim of the toolkit was to create a kind of funnel going from higher level detail to more granular detail. So what you saw earlier was the higher level, where should we start? Employees, suppliers, government payments. If the decision is suppliers, within suppliers, even then you face this decision about which suppliers to start with, which is what the screen reflects. Once you've done that, of course, you have to think about costs. So what we've done in the toolkit, in fact, at the next step of it, is provided an opportunity to evaluate costs using a very simple invoice calculator. Now that calculator has been populated with some basic assumptions. They're assumptions that a user can change at either a simple level or a detailed level. And when the FICORP team runs through its options, it finds an output screen that looks something like this, about what the cost of its invoice payments were before, what they could be after transitioning some of those suppliers to electronic payments. And this enables them to come out with a cost savings number, a number in this case of 27%, but doesn't even count the possibility of reduced losses on cash in transit and so on, which they've experienced at some of their collection centers in the past. So this looks like
those of us who have come from a business background love playing with spreadsheets and figuring out what different assumptions to change and how that changes our end result. So I'm looking forward to downloading that and working on it. David, that 27% number is a pretty significant number. Is that really representative?
Well, Ruth, in this case, it's obviously a synthetic number from the assumptions of this case, but it is drawn from an experience base of, for example, Filipino businesses who could save as little as 25%, but a whole lot more if they were able and willing to digitize their supplier process. As I mentioned earlier, the invoicing part is typically only one part of that bigger process, and the bigger savings come from digitizing even more. So it seems like at least a reasonable framework to be thinking of, but in each business's context, of course, needs to be very carefully evaluated.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to that then. And the next step is
talking about risk, in fact. Yeah, because there's no return without risk, is there? So in this case, the FICORP team has to think through some questions. In the toolkit, you'll find a checklist of typical questions to think about in the case of suppliers. As you can see in the answer column there, they've thought about a number of them, but they're willing to admit, and this is an important point, that they haven't yet gone through a whole lot of the control risks which come from, for example, converting some of those payments to small farmers into digital format. And what they're flagging in this exercise is they really need to think about that some more with the internal and external auditors to ensure that the control environment is maintained going forward.
Yes, I mean, these risks would vary hugely by the particular business and the particular market that the company is working in. And so you've got 4 here, but actually there'll be 4 different ones for each kind of business that people are looking at, or is there pretty much, I mean, obviously for suppliers, they would be pretty similar. How would you advise people on thinking about these risks?
Well, I think core categories that would be relatively similar. For example, that first one, which is really to make sure that your suppliers are in fact willing, because if they're not, you could end up with some problems down the line as you force them or as you implement the new approach. But certainly businesses will have to tailor these questions to their own environments, building off at least the core categories here.
Okay, so we've done all these 5 steps, and then we come up with a recommendation for the CEO, right? I mean CFO.
That's right. So this team proudly reports back, and all you see on your screens there are in the little box a summary of the motivations, the drivers with the ratings that they gave them earlier. But because they've now been through this process of saying, okay, we know where we start from, 1% digital by volume, 17% by value, we've calculated that we really can shift all the large farmers to electronic, and we can incentivize them by paying them quicker, sooner. For the small farmers, we're going to be realistic. We'll shift half of them within a year. And we'll do that working with things like mobile money products in the areas where those are available, which is not everywhere. That's why we can't do 100%. So the result of that is this team says to the CFO, we have assessed against these drivers our plan, which is that within a year, 52% of all our payments will be digital. It'll be almost 90% by value because of the way we've targeted it. And this exercise is merely going back and saying, we really think we can reduce costs, at least 27% a year, as we saw previously. We can improve cash flow management. We're hitting the big values here, especially to farmers who were previously paid by check and with uncertain periods of when those checks would actually be deposited. We're going to reduce the risk of robbery. In the area of satisfying the needs of suppliers and CSR, Slightly less sure, simply because the smaller farmers, there's going to be some work involved there. Work together with a bank, and in this case, a mobile money supplier, to get their needs satisfied. But we're relatively confident, and so the team comes out and says, yes, we do think there's a case to shift. The shift could be as much as from 1% to 52% by volume within a year. And that would be the case made to the CFO.
Well, I am sure that if there are any CFOs participating in our webinar today, they would jump at the opportunity to save 20%, 27%. So, so that sounds like a great result for the team that's reporting to the CFO. But obviously, you know, this is a composite case, as you've said, and that each market is different. So I'd like to take this opportunity to ask all of our webinar participants today what they think is the biggest challenge in their own markets to digitizing payments. So you can see on the screen there are able to see that there are 5 options that we've got here in front of you. Is it that the business case you haven't made yet? Is it that the first challenge that David had talked about, that suppliers won't accept digital payments? Is it that your bank colleagues don't yet have payment instruments that you can work with? Or are you concerned about security risks? Or is there something else? Please, if there's something else, please put your question into the question box so that we can address it in the Q&A session that's coming up. So it would be, I was just in India, and for our colleagues who are working in India, I would be clicking B, so because that's one of their challenges. So it'll be really interesting to see what in your own markets what your biggest challenges are. So let's close the poll and see. There you go. 53% have B. Most suppliers in my country will not accept digital payments. That's a massive issue, clearly, David. And then distributed, then obviously the business case has to be worked on, which is why we have the toolkit. And then we've got a few something else. We'll look at those questions there. So David, is this what you expected?
Pretty much no surprises there. These 4 reasons are the reasons that come out of typical surveys of businesses in a range of countries. This acceptance question that you've highlighted tends to be the biggest. And that's where it's really important often to have government policy involved. So, for example, in Nigeria, that has ceased to be the biggest problem for large businesses because of the government policy, which has in many ways pushed people to do that. It's made it just a bit easier on the acceptance side. It's left other issues to be clear, and that's where this business case has to be looked at, and as you said, that's really the focus of this toolkit.
Well, there are some great questions coming in, and we're hitting the 15 minutes to go mark. So I think it would be a great, I'd really like to take some of these questions that are coming in. So mobile, you know, we're going to get, there's going to be lots of people interested in mobile payments. Is that going to be a game changer for businesses?
Well, Ruth, frankly, we're seeing it creep in around the world at different speeds, depending on the maturity of the mobile money solution. So we're seeing it in areas like salary payments, somewhat in different parts of the world, among smaller businesses, even potentially around suppliers. But the issue is, of course, today that with today's generation of mobile money solutions, typically the value that can be paid per payment is below the threshold at which most, certainly medium-sized businesses, would be able to make use of it. I think that'll change over time. And of course, when you use this word mobile, it's a word everyone's using. Ultimately, it's a channel of some sort. And as we see more and more use of smartphones by smaller businesses, we're seeing that around the world today, even in less developed countries. So that makes the service that they can access more like a conventional banking service, not subject to the same limits, perhaps, as the existing mobile money services today. So in short, I would say game changer in time, yes. At the moment, creeping in bits and pieces, but it's just one channel. And for businesses today, there's no question that the use of other channels, conventional PCs in offices, are by far more prevalent and more likely to be the case, at least in the foreseeable future.
Well, that's not a question that's going to go away. So, and I just remind you, if there are others who want to ask questions, then please type them into the question section in your on the right-hand side of the screen in the GoToWebinar control panel. So, another question that David, going back to the point that we just had on the poll, the issue of acceptance. So, you've said that when there's government policy, it helps. But if we're a business, and that's our biggest challenge, what should we do about it?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one that we've been fascinated to see, even where government policy has created an environment where people are more receptive. Even then, Nigerian businesses have had to go about making the case to their suppliers, and often it's through offering the incentive of quicker payment. So unlike in the case of check payments on invoice, there's a delay when you mail the check out. There's a need to go and bank the check. There's a need for that check to clear. It could take 7 to 10 days from when the payment is in fact authorized to when the supplier receives it. Whereas with an electronic payment, it can be authorized and processed and even received in the accounts within 1 or 2 days, some cases even sooner. So that incentive, which addresses the supplier's pain points around cash flow management, seems to be a really important one. And it's the type of thing that businesses have to frame up in their discussion with key suppliers to make them willing to accept the change.
So yes, if you help solve people's problems, they're going to be more willing to work with you. It's always a good approach to take. So, you know, if I'm a business, either a small or a large one, and why wouldn't I just want 100% of my employees to get their salary paid in some form of electronic or digital form? Put it into an account, they get to save, they get a massive other opportunities, other products. Is there any reason why I would not want 100%? I mean, that seems to be the most obvious way to go.
Yeah, it does look all too obvious, and so often the advantages to the business are very compelling. You solve a whole lot of your own problems. But you know, there's at least reason to think things through, and that's why in this process that we've recommended in the toolkit, thinking about the stakeholders, in particular thinking about the payees as stakeholders, so in the case of salaries, the employees, at least means a bit of thinking to say, well, what type of costs or inconveniences or possible difficulties would you be shifting onto them if you just push them all to 100%, which you could probably do as an employer. And that's where thinking that through could save what has happened in a few cases, labor problems, as the result of employees feeling pushed into a solution for which they were not ready. And so to do that shift well takes some time, takes some effort in communication, even persuasion, even where you have the power to do it, like with your employees. So, you know, today in developing countries in urban areas, it seems highly feasible to say that all of your urban employees could be paid electronically, because there are the facilities for them to access cash or even do other things with the money in their accounts. In rural areas, like FICORP's rural supply centers, one at least needs to think a little bit more carefully. And indeed, that's what the case study under the salaries module for FICORP shows. You need to just think that through before pushing all the employees at the same time into digital payments. That way it'll stick. It really will be a win-win for all the stakeholders involved.
Okay, so really understanding where the employees are and what their situation is of course very important. But it's the way you're saying in any urban center that we should aim for 100%. So that's a great conclusion to come to. David, the other question that several people were concerned about in terms of a challenge was the banks not yet offering suitable payment instruments. Can you talk about that challenge?
Yes, it's an interesting one because it really does vary by context. So for example, in the Filipino case study, which is forthcoming, there some of the businesses reported that as an obstacle. And it wasn't so much that the instruments were not available, it related to the way they were priced. So for example, it makes a very big difference if the electronic transfer instrument is paid for both by the payer, in our example that's FICORP, as well as by the recipient, the payee, or the suppliers in this case. If they have to pay to receive money, when previously they got it for free, so to speak, via check, it makes it a whole lot harder. So it's areas like that in which we see some obstacles to getting to type of payment instruments which distribute the costs fairly, which are appropriately timed, so they don't always need to be real time. You know, often doing it in batch mode, so there's a one-day payment lag is perfectly adequate here. Unfortunately, in more and more countries, that type of payment instrument, the basic EFT, electronic fund transfer in bulk, is available and is increasingly reliable, which of course matters to businesses who want to know that their payees are getting the value out on the other side as promised.
So to our friends who are working in financial service providers on the webinar today, there's an opportunity to work with the businesses to increase your business and to help the businesses as well in terms of finding a right product to work for them, for both you and for the business. So that's great. So there's an opportunity for engagement there, David, I see, in terms of figuring out the pricing. So
absolutely.
Sorry?
Absolutely. I was just going to say, we sense among the businesses that we've spoken to in this process often a real hunger and interest. They see this is the way the winds of the future are blowing towards more digital, but often feel confused, often feel the need for people to help them in their choices around payment instruments. So it's a big opportunity for the financial service providers as well.
Great. So could you just quickly, the other question that came in was about the security risk, and we're not talking about the risk from the financial service provider, we're talking about to payers and payees here. So could you just briefly comment on that?
Yes, certainly. So this is obviously a big and important area as companies enter this world of online payments, in which there are a whole lot of categories of risks that need to be thought through very carefully. Access controls, for example, all sorts of logical controls. And any bank worth its salt here would have advice to give, would also have typical corporate payment platforms that would build in a whole number of these controls to make it easier. Even with the platform, however, there's a need for companies to reassess the controls around their own authorization processes as they go digital. So it really is a process of assessing those sort of control risks very carefully, because with electronic, as that value shifts around, you as the company's CFO or treasurer really want to be sure that the controls are robust and not subject to all the horror stories which you can hear about, which are surprisingly few in practice once these controls are implemented properly.
Okay, so we've got a last question coming up, David, before we close off the webinar for today. So it's really one that I would like to think about, because tomorrow we're looking at a country diagnostic. So is that going to be useful for businesses to understand the whole payment context in a country?
Yes, so for business it's often a challenge because business has a lot of its own priorities, doesn't have the time to do fancy research exercises around all the payment things going on in the country. And that's where diagnostics such as those done by Better Than Cash can be steps in that direction. And as you said, the forthcoming webinar will talk about that. For the average business though, we find the most helpful thing is often to talk with your banker, or perhaps even with the local banking association, or with advisors who specialize in understanding not only what's available today, but what's coming tomorrow. And that's what a good diagnostic should ultimately be able to point towards, the way things are changing, so that as you build your case to change, you aren't simply doing it around what's available today, but rather the way the winds are blowing for tomorrow. So business doesn't have the time or the luxury of doing all the big diagnostic exercises, but it could take advantage where they have been done, and even where they haven't, there typically are sources of advice that can be tapped in country to get a handle on that in framing the business's options.
Great. So we're right at the end now, so I'd like to go through what would be the next steps for everybody. That you will receive a link to join a toolkit community on Yammer. This is a closed community that is looking for those people who are working on the business toolkit. You will be able to download the beta version, and we would over the next month would very much value your feedback, saying this doesn't make sense, what can we add in an extra example here, this I love this cost calculator. Just give us your feedback and share your stories, maybe other examples that would be useful. And then we'll make the final revisions, and then our new website will have the web-enabled version in April. And so if you just want to wait till April, that's also fine, but we'd love you to be part of this toolkit. And for those of you who are consultants in particular, to work with it so that you can, we are sure that it works for you, because we want it to be useful to as many different businesses and consultants and advisors who work with businesses as well. So it's at this point, it's appropriate for me to say thank you so much to all of you who've been sending in your questions, and most particularly to David for sharing your expertise and developing this toolkit. And for those of you who also want to follow us, you can follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn or at our website. So thank you so much to everybody, and wish you all a good evening, afternoon, day, wherever you are in the world. And thanks again, David.
Thank you, Ruth.